April 8, 1943. High above the coast of France. The oxygen mask clung to Oberleutnant Ralph Hermanson's face, but it could not hide the cold smirk in his eyes. Through the crystal-clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf, he watched the dark specks materialize into ungainly, climbing shapes. The veteran ace of a renowned fighter wing studied the American fighters, making their combat debut over occupied Europe. "The Army has sent us flying milk bottles," he transmitted to his wingman, a laugh cracking his voice. The sight was genuinely comical to him. Below, a full squadron of Republic P47 Thunderbolts of a veteran fighter group lumbered upward in a tight formation. Their immensely powerful Pratt and Whitney radial engines screaming, straining against a tremendous weight that seemed to defy the very sky. To pilots, bred on the sleek Spitfire and nimble Messerschmitt, these American machines were grotesque. Barrel-shaped fuselages, topped with greenhouse canopies, and wings that seemed like a desperate afterthought on their massive bodies. What Hermanson did not know, what none of the wolves circling above could have possibly conceived, was that they were not witnessing a joke. They were staring at the future instrument of their own destruction. Within a year and a half, these objects of derision would transform into instruments of pure terror. Their 8 heavy-caliber Browning machine guns becoming the most feared sound in the German sky. The mathematics of annihilation were already loaded in those broad wings. A vast quantity of ammunition, a combined rate of fire so intense, it created a solid wall of lead that could saw a Messerschmitt in half in the blink of an eye. The transformation began that very morning, when Major Donald Blakesley, commanding a fighter squadron, spotted the German formation positioning for its attack. A former Eagle Squadron veteran who had recently traded his agile Spitfire for this behemoth, he understood a brutal truth his men did not yet grasp. Survival in the Thunderbolt required abandoning everything they thought they knew about air combat. This was not a delicate dogfighter. It was a strategic weapon, a high-altitude juggernaut. The P-47 represented a radical heresy of design philosophy. While German engineers relentlessly refined lightweight interceptors optimized for climb and turn performance, the team at Republic Aviation had engineered something unprecedented. They used mass, raw power, and overwhelming firepower to rewrite the rules of aerial warfare. Among the many American pilots spread across the French azure that morning were men who would become legends. Future aces, whose names would strike fear into the heart of the Luftwaffe. But on that April day, they were novices in an untested machine, facing the most experienced and lethal fighter force on the planet. The Germans had been fighting continuously for years, battle-hardened veterans of multiple fronts across Europe. The Americans had been in combat for exactly 0 days. This story is about how industrial logic systematically eviscerated tactical brilliance. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was forged in a time of great panic. As the enemy fighter arms swept the skies of France, Alexander Kartveli, Republic's chief designer, received urgent specifications from the U.S. Army Air Corps. They demanded a high-altitude interceptor capable of matching the enemy's best. What Kartveli delivered was a monster that redefined the possible. "It will be a dinosaur," he admitted to his design team, "but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." The first P-47 prototype was a shock to the system. It weighed a staggering amount more than its predecessor. Its massive turbo-supercharger system, with its complex ducting running through the rear fuselage, gave it a pregnant, purposeful appearance. Test pilots approaching it for the first time would circle the machine, look up, and ask the same question. "This thing actually flies?" Not only did it fly, it possessed a supernatural dominance at altitude. The enormous double-wasp engine, a multi-cylinder radial beast, could maintain its full, devastating horsepower at extreme heights, where German fighters wheezed, gasped for air, and lost their lethal potency. The ingenious turbo-supercharger, fed by exhaust gases, delivered sea-level performance in the thin, killing air of the stratosphere, where conventional superchargers failed. Major Hubert Hub Zemke, commanding a fighter group during its training, initially despised the aircraft. His unit suffered devastating losses in a short period. A significant number of pilots and aircraft lost in training accidents over several months. The P-47 was killing more Americans in training than the Germans would in the fighter's first months of combat. It was a notoriously difficult machine to master. It ground-looped on landing, torque rolled violently on takeoff, and dove with such ferocious, unchecked enthusiasm that pilots discovered the phenomenon of compressibility, their controls locking solid as shock waves formed on the wings. But those who persevered, those who mastered its brute nature, discovered something extraordinary. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma, who would become one of America's top aces, described his first flight. "It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it, you aimed it." The first combat encounters in the spring confirmed every German prejudice. The P-47s couldn't turn with a Focke-Wulf, couldn't climb with a Messerschmitt, and couldn't match their nimble handling at medium altitudes. Enemy pilots quickly developed ruthless tactics to exploit these weaknesses, attacking from below, where the heavy Thunderbolt struggled, and forcing turning fights where agility mattered more than firepower. Hauptmann Joseph Pips Priller, a commanding officer, reported to headquarters after his first encounter. "The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. Our boys are calling them jabos, fat targets pretending to be warriors." The statistics seem to confirm German confidence. In their first month of operations, American fighter groups lost many Thunderbolts for only a handful of confirmed German kills. But something strange, something ominous was happening in those early encounters, a detail German intelligence fatally overlooked. The P-47s that were shot down had absorbed incredible punishment before finally falling. One aircraft returned from a mission riddled with numerous cannon holes and countless machine gun strikes, damage that would have disintegrated a Messerschmitt or Spitfire. The massive radial engine, lacking vulnerable coolant systems, simply shrugged off hits that would have stopped a liquid-cooled fighter cold. More significantly, when a P-47's guns did find their mark, the results were catastrophic. The Thunderbolt's weapons battery created a convergence zone of destruction German pilots had never experienced. Unlike the rifle-caliber weapons of early warfighters, or the cannon with their limited ammunition, the American fighter could maintain sustained fire for what felt like an eternity in aerial combat. The event that would begin changing German perceptions occurred on a late June day over France. It involved Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of a fighter squadron, and an encounter that would become legendary on both sides of the conflict. Johnson's large formation of P-47s was returning from escort duty when they were bounced by a group of Focke-Wulfs from an elite squadron. The Germans executed a perfect attack, diving from the sun with an overwhelming speed advantage. Johnson's Thunderbolt, flying at the rear of the formation, was caught in the crossfire of multiple attackers, taking catastrophic damage in the first seconds of combat. Multiple cannon shells exploded across his aircraft. The canopy shattered. Hydraulic fluid sprayed into the cockpit like arterial blood. The engine cowling was torn away, and fire erupted behind the instrument panel. Johnson, wounded by shrapnel, tried to bail out, but discovered the canopy was jammed shut. A cannon shell had exploded in the canopy track, welding it closed. He was trapped in a dying, burning machine at a great altitude. What happened next defied every assumption about combat damage tolerance. Despite having no forward visibility through the oil-covered windscreen, a barely functioning engine that shook violently, and controls that responded only intermittently, Johnson managed to level the aircraft and point its nose toward England. The P-47 continued flying with damage that would have reduced any other fighter to falling debris. Then, it got worse. A lone Focke-Wulf, flown by an unknown pilot, discovered the crippled Thunderbolt, limping toward the channel at a very slow speed. The German positioned himself behind Johnson's wreck and opened fire with his cannon and machine guns. Johnson, unable to evade, could only huddle behind his armor plate and pray. The Thunderbolt absorbed the German's entire cannon ammunition load. Then the German repositioned and fired again, this time with only his machine guns. With his heavy ammunition exhausted, the German pilot pulled alongside, staring in sheer disbelief at the flying wreck. Johnson could see his face clearly. Young, blond, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion, to something approaching superstitious fear. The German repositioned one last time and emptied his remaining machine gun ammunition into the Thunderbolt. Still, it flew. He pulled alongside again, shook his head in apparent amazement, gave an informal salute, and peeled away, presumably out of ammunition and out of answers. Johnson's P-47 landed with its engine failing on the runway. The crew chief stopped counting bullet and cannon holes after reaching an astonishing number. One cannon shell had exploded inches from Johnson's head. Another had detonated against the armor plate behind his seat. The engine had taken direct hits. The control cables were partially severed. Several of the main longerons, the structural backbone of the fuselage, were shot through. Yet, this brutalized machine had brought him home. The survival of Johnson's aircraft sent shockwaves through both air forces. American engineers studying the wreckage realized they had profoundly underestimated their own creation. German intelligence, receiving combat reports, initially refused to believe it. No aircraft could absorb that much punishment. But testimony from multiple pilots confirmed the impossible. The Thunderbolt had taken everything the enemy's best fighter could deliver and had survived. By midsummer, American pilots were learning to exploit the P-47's true strengths. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert "Hub" Zemke, a fighter group commander, had discovered the secret through brutal trial and error. His mantra became doctrine. Don't turn with them. Don't climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns. The Thunderbolt's massive weight, initially its greatest shame, became its ultimate weapon. In a dive, nothing in the European theater could catch it. From a very high altitude, a P-47 could reach an incredible speed, faster than any German fighter could achieve, even in a vertical dive. This incredible velocity could then be converted back into altitude in a zoom climb that left pursuing fighters helplessly behind. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin, who would become one of the first American aces in Europe, developed what became known as the boom and zoom tactic. Instead of engaging in suicidal dogfights, P-47 formations would climb to a great height, higher than German fighters could effectively operate. When the enemy appeared below, the Thunderbolts would roll inverted and dive, reaching speeds that made deflection shooting impossible for the defenders. At the bottom of these dives, the American heavy machine guns would speak. German pilots who survived described it as facing a wall of lead. The combined firepower created an impenetrable zone of destruction. Aircraft caught in this convergence pattern didn't just go down. They disintegrated. The true revelation came during a major dual raid deep into Germany. This mission would demonstrate both the P-47's limitations and its terrifying effectiveness. Major David Schilling, leading a fighter squadron, encountered a formation of Messerschmitt destroyer aircraft positioning to attack the bomber formations with their heavy cannon and rocket armament. The twin-engine German fighters, heavily armed but less maneuverable, were the specialized bomber killers. Schilling's flight of Thunderbolts rolled into their attack dive from a high altitude. A German gunner in one of the destroyers who survived later recounted in interrogation. "The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven. I opened fire from a long distance. Good hits. I saw them strike the fighter's wing. The P47 didn't even wobble. Then he fired. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart. Not shot down, destroyed. Wings separated from fuselage, tail severed. The crew compartment shredded into metal confetti. In mere seconds, it became nothing." Multiple enemy aircraft were obliterated in less than a minute. The German pilots had never experienced such concentrated, sustained firepower. Each 47 pesos carried a massive quantity of rounds per gun, a tremendous amount in total, weighing nearly a ton. At a standard convergence distance, all 8 guns' ballistic paths intersected in a zone several feet in diameter. Anything in that zone faced a hailstorm of heavy projectiles every single second. By the early autumn, the enemy was discovering another horrifying reality. The P-47's performance improved dramatically with altitude, while their own fighters suffered. The turbo-supercharged engine maintained its rated power output, up to a very high ceiling. German fighters, relying on less advanced superchargers, saw their performance degrade significantly above a medium altitude. One of Germany's most successful aces encountered this reality fatally on an October day. Leading his unit against a bomber formation at a high altitude, he found his own fighter sluggish and unresponsive in the thin air. The powerful engine, dominant at medium altitudes, was gasping for oxygen nearly 6 miles above the Earth. When P-47s dove on his formation from an even greater height, the German fighters were sitting ducks. Robert Johnson, now an experienced combat pilot on his way to ace status, was flying at an extreme altitude when he spotted the distinctive enemy aircraft with its elaborate nose art. Johnson's combat report was chillingly clinical. "Opened fire from close range, observed strikes along entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. The death of such a renowned pilot sent a tremor through the enemy command. If one of their very best could not survive, what chance did the average pilot have?" The following January, a new variant began arriving in England that would complete the Thunderbolt's transformation. This new P-47 featured a hydromatic propeller with massive paddle blades, enormous in diameter, with broad cord blades that bit into the air like massive oars. The improvement in climb rate was immediate and dramatic. Where earlier Thunderbolts had climbed at an anemic rate at sea level, the new variants could achieve a much improved rate, now matching or exceeding German fighters at most altitudes. The massive propeller also improved acceleration, allowing P-47s to build energy faster in level flight. A veteran enemy pilot encountered the new variants in February. He wrote in his combat diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We bounced to formation, expecting our usual advantage. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to disengage, they followed us up to a great height. One of ours was caught and blown apart. Nothing left but smoke and fragments. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." The paddle blade propeller did more than improve performance. It changed the sound of the Thunderbolt. The distinctive thundering roar created by the blade tips, reaching supersonic speeds, could be heard from miles away. German ground troops reported being able to identify approaching P-47s by sound alone. A deep, threatening rumble that meant death from above. They began calling it Donnerschlag, thunderclap. By early spring, P-47s equipped with external fuel tanks could escort bombers deep into Germany. The standard configuration carried large wing tanks or a sizable belly tank, extending their range to a considerable distance. With the paddle blade propeller providing improved performance, even when loaded, Thunderbolts could fight on equal terms immediately after dropping their tanks. The enemy's desperate response was to concentrate on the bombers, hoping to inflict enough losses to stop the American daylight campaign. But this required flying through the P-47 escort screen, an increasingly suicidal proposition. Enemy pilots developed a grudging respect that bordered on sheer fear. One of Germany's top aces survived an encounter that left him badly wounded. He later recalled, "We saw them above us, fat silhouettes against the sun." Someone laughed and said, "Here come the flying pigs." Nobody was laughing half a minute later. They came down like an avalanche, faster than we could react. The first pass destroyed several of our fighters. Just gone. Transformed into burning debris. Their guns didn't fire in bursts like ours. They poured out solid streams of fire. Getting caught in that stream meant instant death. As other fighters took over the long-range escort duties later that spring, P-47 units increasingly focused on ground attack, a role that would make them the most feared aircraft in the German arsenal. The transition began in earnest as the Allies prepared for the invasion of France. The Thunderbolt's heavy machine gun battery proved equally effective against ground targets. The standard armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate the top armor of most German vehicles, while the sheer volume of fire could destroy soft targets in seconds. A short burst put a large number of heavy projectiles into a target area the size of a truck. But it was the addition of bombs and rockets that transformed the P-47 into a true multi-role monster. A later variant could carry a heavy bomb load under the wings and fuselage, a load equal to early war medium bombers. Later variants added zero-length rocket stubs for multiple high-velocity aircraft rockets, each equivalent to a powerful artillery shell. A German commander during the Normandy campaign experienced P-47 ground attacks firsthand. They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying. Engines roaring, rockets screaming. Then the hammer of those heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist. Dozens of vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in one pass. The psychological effect on the men was devastating. They called them jabos. But these were something beyond that. They were flying artillery with the accuracy of snipers. On invasion day, the enemy discovered how completely the balance of power had shifted. A vast number of P-47s provided air cover for the invasion, creating an impenetrable umbrella over the beaches. Enemy fighters attempting to reach the landing zones were massacred. One of the only German pilots to get through that day reported, "The sky belonged to the Americans. Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level to a very high altitude. We tried to break through at dawn. A group of fighters from our unit. I was the only one to return. The P-47s were waiting at every altitude. You couldn't climb over them, couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain." In the weeks following the invasion, P-47 systematically destroyed German movement in daylight. The statistics were staggering. In a single month, Air Force Thunderbolts claimed a vast number of locomotives, many thousands of trucks, hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles, and innumerable horse-drawn vehicles. The enemy army was forced to move only at night, severely hampering their ability to respond to Allied advances. The ultimate vindication of the Thunderbolt's evolution came in its encounters with German jet fighters. The Messerschmitt jet, with its tremendous top speed, should have been untouchable by any propeller-driven aircraft. But Thunderbolt pilots discovered they could catch the jets in two situations: during their vulnerable takeoff and landing phases, and in high-speed dives from altitude. A lieutenant colonel became one of the first pilots to shoot down a jet with a P-47. Diving from a high altitude, his Thunderbolt reached a speed fast enough to catch the jet in level flight. The jet pilot, confident in his speed advantage, never saw the diving P-47 until the guns opened up from a close distance. The combat report noted, "The enemy aircraft disintegrated under fire. Large pieces, including both engines, separated from the fuselage. The pilot did not escape. The concentrated fire of the heavy machine guns proved more effective than we anticipated against jet aircraft." Later, specialized variants were deployed specifically to counter the German jets. With boosted power and refined aerodynamics, these ultimate Thunderbolts could reach a high speed in level flight at altitude, fast enough to intercept even jets under the right conditions. The final, crushing demonstration of American industrial might occurred on a New Year's Day. The enemy's desperate, last-gasp attempt to destroy Allied air power on the ground. A great many German fighters, including their best remaining pilots, launched surprise attacks on Allied airfields. At one airfield, home to a P-47 fighter group, the attack initially succeeded. Enemy fighters destroyed many Thunderbolts on the ground, along with several other aircraft. A captured German pilot, brought to the command post, pointed at the burning wreckage and taunted, "What do you think of that?" The American commander's response became legendary. He pointed to the flight line, where ground crews were already pushing damaged aircraft aside and preparing for replacements. "By tomorrow, we'll have many new ones." "How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The German pilot's smirk disappeared. Within 2 days, factory-fresh P-47s filled the flight line, flown in from depots. The enemy, however, lost a large number of aircraft and, critically, many irreplaceable instructors and squadron leaders. These were losses they could never recover from. The numbers told the story of an inevitable, industrial-scale defeat. Republic Aviation produced a tremendous number of P-47s during the war, more than any other American fighter. At peak production, a factory on Long Island completed one Thunderbolt after another around the clock. Another plant, built from empty farmland, was soon producing a vast number of aircraft every month. Each 47 pesos was a complex machine of countless thousands of parts, miles of electrical wiring, and immense quantities of raw materials. The engine alone contained a great many individual components, machined to incredibly fine tolerances. Yet, American workers, many of them women, who had never seen an aircraft before the war, assembled these complex machines with a precision that exceeded peacetime standards. The ammunition production was equally staggering. Each 47 peso sortie required a large quantity of heavy-caliber ammunition, and with many hundreds of Thunderbolts flying daily missions, consumption exceeded many millions of rounds per month. A major arsenal produced tens of millions of rounds monthly. Each cartridge was manufactured to tolerances measured in tiny fractions of an inch. Even more impressive than the aircraft production was the pilot training. By the war's later years, the United States was graduating a huge number of pilots annually from advanced training, more than Germany had trained in the entire war. Each 47 pilot received an extensive number of hours of flight training before entering combat, including a significant amount of time in advanced fighters. German pilots, by contrast, were entering combat with a very small number of hours total time by the war's end. The quality showed in combat. American pilots arrived in Europe trained in formation flying, instrument navigation, gunnery, and tactics. They had practiced against captured German aircraft, understanding their enemy's capabilities and limitations. A new arrival exemplified this advantage. I had a great many hours in my logbook, including a good amount of time in the P47. I'd fired at towed targets, practiced deflection shooting, studied gun camera film from actual combat. My first mission, I knew exactly what to do. The German pilot I faced couldn't have had half my experience. It wasn't even a fair fight. In the war's final spring, the man who had once mocked the P-47s was interviewed by propaganda officials. His statement was deemed too demoralizing for publication. "The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever built. Its firepower is unprecedented. But beyond the machine is what it represents. Unlimited production. They lose some. They build many more. We lose one. It's gone forever. Their pilots arrive better trained than our instructors. We laughed at them before. We're not laughing now." By the final April of the war, the enemy Air Force was a ghost. Fuel shortages grounded most aircraft. Experienced pilots were dead or captured. Airfields were cratered ruins. But even with aircraft and fuel, enemy pilots faced an impossible equation. Attacking meant facing P-47 formations that owned every altitude from ground level to an extreme height. One of the last German pilots trained flew a single combat mission before the war ended. His encounter lasted mere seconds. I saw them diving from above, several Thunderbolts in perfect formation. I tried to turn, but they were too fast. The leader fired from a medium distance. My aircraft shook, like it was hit by sledgehammers. The engine exploded. The wings separated. I barely escaped. In the parachute, I watched them destroy my entire unit. Several fighters gone in under a minute. The sky rained burning aluminum and bodies. The psychological impact was complete. Enemy pilots developed a sickness, physical symptoms of stress appearing when Thunderbolts were reported in the area. The distinctive thunder of approaching Thunderbolts caused instant panic among ground troops. Survival meant finding cover immediately. The final statistics of the P-47 service defy comprehension. In the European theater alone, Thunderbolt pilots were credited with destroying many thousands of enemy aircraft in aerial combat and many thousands more on the ground. They annihilated many thousands of locomotives, countless railway cars, a great number of armored fighting vehicles, a vast fleet of trucks, and innumerable horse-drawn vehicles. The primary Air Force, equipped with P-47s, flew a tremendous number of combat sorties, dropped an immense tonnage of bombs, fired hundreds of millions of rounds of ammunition, and launched tens of thousands of rockets. Thunderbolt units achieved an excellent kill ratio in aerial combat, while maintaining the lowest loss rate of any Allied fighter bomber. Behind these numbers lay the human cost. The enemy lost a vast number of pilots. Many fell to the concentrated fire of the 8 heavy machine guns. Each loss represented years of training that could never be replaced. By the end, the average enemy fighter pilot had very little combat experience. The average 47 pilot was a seasoned veteran. The P-47 Thunderbolt entered combat as an object of derision, a flying milk bottle mocked by its enemies. It ended the war as an instrument of annihilation, a god of destruction that reshaped the very nature of aerial warfare. In between, 8 synchronized Browning machine guns rewrote the rules of engagement, teaching a brutal, final lesson to the world: that courage and individual brilliance are ultimately meaningless when faced with the cold, relentless, and overwhelming force of industrial annihilation. The laughter of the enemy aces, echoing in the clear skies of that spring, had long since faded, swallowed by the thunder of 1,000 powerful engines and the relentless hammer of heavy-caliber fire. And by the final month of the war, there was no one left to laugh at all. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America.